everybody, Northern Lion here. I just got back from PDXCon in Miami, which is Paradox Interactive's media event where they send people who are fans of their strategy games or want to cover their Paradox Interactive style games. They send them there, and then they basically preview the games to them. So that's what I am doing here, much like a traditional magazine or website might do, and much like other, YouTube video people who were there, like Quill18 and Gassy Mexican and Eat My Diction, Angry Joe, etc., are probably going to do. I'm going to do it too. So in this video, we're going to talk about the Paradox Development Studio grand strategy games that were talked about and announced at PDXCon. So included in this video is going to be a little bit of discussion about CK2, Rajas of India. I always said almost said Sons of Abraham there, which would have been very strange. EU4's expansion, Wealth of Nations as well. And in addition to that, Hearts of Iron 4. Now, for all of these games, we were given hands-off, like 20 to 30-minute demos with the project leads. So we sat with the CK2 project lead, the EU4 project lead, and the Hearts of Iron project lead. We didn't actually play it ourselves, and the games are in various states of being done. Keep in mind, this is preview content, not review content. So I'm not coming out here and saying this is good, this is bad. I'm giving you my feedback and also going down the selling points and the stuff that we were able to glean from the developers in our Q&A session. So I'm going to start by talking about Crusader Kings 2, Rajas of India, because this is the most exciting one for me because I'm most familiar with CK2, and also it makes like kind of the easiest change to explain to a game that I already think is really good. So Rajas of India, the big thing that's coming out with this, and it's coming out spring 2014, March, I believe, is the date that has been set. Set, expected, projected. And other words that rhyme with that, but it's going to be $15, at least that's the projected price point right now. The big change is that it is coming with a huge extension of the map eastwards. And what's cool about this, and I want to get this out of the way really quickly, is that, as with Sons of Abraham, there's going to be a patch that comes out coinciding with the release of Rajas of India, and it's actually going to make it so that free players also have this extended map. So just because you're not buying the DLC, at least not right away, that doesn't mean you're going to be missing out on a huge area of geography. You just won't be able to play as the Indian rulers and maybe other rulers that are included in the new geography. What does the new geography include? Because we haven't really seen too many screenshots of it. Basically, it includes... it extends it eastwards, and on the southeast side, it has the entire Indian subcontinent, and then it goes up north through Tibet. Tibet's not playable because that's a whole different thing. And this was not stated at the event. I have to stress this. But when they said Tibet was not playable because it's got its own complications with Buddhism, and Tibet Buddhism is different than the Buddhism that's going to be added in Rajas of India, which I'm going to talk about, made me think that maybe eventually a future planned DLC is going to focus on China and maybe the Tibet area as well. But anyway, up north through currently unplayable, I think it's Terra Incognita, Tibet, and then includes other areas of Central Asia and Northern Asia, which is actually going to extend the reach of countries and kingdoms and khanates like Cumania and Perm, etc., that are kind of right now artificially cut off. So it kind of changes those starts as well, and you should be able to play those. But the Indian stuff is all going to be gated behind the expansion. What's the big stuff that's coming out of India? Because obviously that is the main focus of the expansion. 3 new religions. So there will be Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Jainism. Sorry, it's been a long trip back. And all of these are going to have kind of their own unique features. Their own unique ways that other people see them as well. So the examples we were given is that, and again, I apologize if this is some, religiously or spiritually touchy subjects that are going to happen here. This is the way it was explained to us. Whether it's historically accurate or not, I don't know. I expect so to some extent because it's Paradox. But anyway, I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers here. But they said the Hindu leaders are going to be a little bit more militaristically aggressive, and whether that's going to, appear in the game in the form of things like maybe looser casus belli. I mean, that's the way it works for like the Norse or pagans if they have an invasion CB. And the other example is as the Yainists, I guess. They have a reputation for being a little bit less aggressive and pacifistic and nonviolent, but that is going to make them a little bit more tolerated as rulers of vassals that don't have the same religion as them. So as of right now, there's like a -30 or -50 penalty if you're a heretic, if you're a different religion, or sorry, an infidel, if you're a different religion than the people you rule over, they dislike you a lot as a result of that. That might be lessened for Yinist rulers. And this was not specifically stated from a mechanical standpoint, but that's the way I imagine that this kind of being more tolerated as a Yinist is going to make itself work in the game. There's also going to be the ability to form an empire in India. I forgot what it's called, if it's the Empire of India or the Empire of Hindustan. I can't remember, but there will be an empire that you can form through it. Also, there is a new terrain type added in the form of jungle tiles. I don't know how that's going to affect combat modifiers. Presumably, again, defensive units are going to be better there. Or sorry, if you're defending, you're going to have an advantage there, I'm assuming. And there's a new unit type being added in the form of war elephants. Now, there's some other stuff that we can talk about as well. I know a frequently asked question, because Yinists are so weird from like a CK2 standpoint, because they're, at least on paper, like non-aggressive and pacifistic. So I asked, are there going to be things like assassinations and stuff like that? Will you still be able to plot against people to kill them? And, that's not known yet. There's still some stuff to talk about there. I'm trying to see what else. I'm just looking at the, basically the fact sheet and the notes that I took. Hundreds of new provinces, so, again, coming in the patch, that is coinciding with the expansion. It's basically set to extend the map about 50%, which is pretty nuts. It's also going to add the Indian caste system. We didn't ask any questions about how that's going to work, and we didn't see it in action, but it'll be interesting to see what comes up with that, or what happens there. Oh, yes, there are some other things. These, I'm assuming, but don't quote me, are probably going to come in the patch as opposed to the expansion itself. But one thing a lot of people were complaining about, at least on, Paradox forums and also, the subreddits for Paradox Plaza, is, well, with you extending the map, it's already kind of ridiculous and ahistorical that people from Ireland can communicate with, like, Byzantine rulers easily. Or maybe that makes sense because I guess they're kind of just different sects of Christianity. Maybe there's channels that they could have communicated through historically, but you know what I mean. Is that there's an enormous geographic distance that it doesn't seem reasonable, especially if you add in, like, India. It doesn't seem reasonable that I could be, playing as the Duke of Munster and I can communicate with a one-county leader in the southern tip of India. That doesn't seem to make much sense. Well, we asked, and they are going to be adding a proximity requirement for diplomatic actions. You'll still be able to see them on the map, but you won't be able to actually interact with them diplomatically unless their province that's closest to you is, under a certain distance away, if that makes sense. So the project lead who we interviewed with said that it probably won't change the way that the game is played right now. So, it probably won't mean that, if you're Irish now, when the patch comes out, you won't be able to interact with, again, say, for example, the Basilius of the Byzantine Empire. But, past that point maybe is where it'll come in. But again, those numbers are all hypothetical, but that's what they said will exist, is a system like that. Other kind of stuff that will be exciting to people who play a lot of CK2. Borderless window mode is coming. That's really cool because, alt-tabbing out of the full screen mode can sometimes lead to problems. Steam multiplayer, so based on Steam works, based on Steam, the way EU4 works, rather than the direct IP stuff they've got going on right now, which is really good for multiplayer sessions with the Roomba and Mathis, and especially if you're playing with strangers, because you maybe don't want to give everyone your IP, but anyway, Steam Workshop support as well. So that's going to be really cool. That's what we learned about Rajas of India. Hopefully you've enjoyed, the screenshots and trailer and B-roll running in the background. It's set to come out again in March, $15, and I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot more about it as we approach that release. Let's talk about EU4 Wealth of Nations, which is something that I'm just pulling up my information on here, which is a little bit more of a difficult one for me to talk about because EU4 is, if we're talking like you can only have one Paradox game, it's not my game yet. It could be one day, but I'm still learning it. I've got like 190 hours in CK2 and like 40 in EU4, which is still a lot, but it's not enough to necessarily know enough to delve into like the mechanics of what's coming in Wealth of Nations. But anyway, just to tell you what Wealth of Nations is about, regardless, Wealth of Nations is, again, we did a 20-minute session or a 30-minute session with the project lead, and it was hands-off, but we did see some of the stuff that's coming. Some of the stuff was, more like this is going to be here, but it's not in here right now, but this is how it would work, using the map as an example. And it's going to focus on trade, and the cool thing is, that they were telling us is that the way it's planned right now is that every EU4 expansion, or every major expansion at least, is going to change and focus on one element of the game comprehensively. So with Conquest of Paradise, which came out recently, that obviously focused on colonization as opposed to anything else. It changed colonial nations, and it made, some of the New World nations, along with the fact that it could just randomize the New World, of course, but it made some of the New World nations have new mechanics. yada yada. Wealth of Nations is going to be that, but for trade this time. And trade, if I'm already kind of a baby when it comes to EU4, trade is like the most kind of, I don't want to say unintuitive, but it's the factor of EU4 that I know the least about. So a lot of the stuff that was kind of suggested, I'm not necessarily just regurgitating information, but I don't know mechanically on that level how it will actually affect the game. But I'll talk about it anyway. The coolest thing for me is that they're adding privateers. And the way privateers are going to work is that basically you will be able to either hire or designate units in your fleet. And I know on the fast facts sheet that we have, it says hire, but I believe they mentioned in the Q&A session that you could actually maybe designate units of your own fleet as well. They're going to be privateers, which basically means they're independent. They kind of report to a pirate nation, but you can send them to a trade node to disrupt the trade of your enemies. So it won't actually bring you back gold, and it won't actually, necessarily give you trade power, but it will destroy the trade of your enemies. Kind of like, dropping a bomb on your enemies. You're not necessarily gaining out of that. You're gaining, well, you're not gaining directly. You're gaining because your enemy is being hurt. But what's cool about it is that kind of reminds me of like support rebels from the covert actions tab. There will be a chance for people that have been ransacked by privateers to know who sent the privateers. And when that comes up, I assume that there's going to be a casus belli that will incentivize going to war with them or allow you to go to war with them without suffering the traditional penalties of stability and whatnot for not having a CB to go to war. And the kind of like ethos that they said they had when they came up with this expansion is we want to incentivize going to war over trade, if that makes sense. They're pushing people into conflict and maybe pushing them into conflict with nations that, traditionally in an EU4 game, you might not have conflict with them as it stands right now. Like, France is maybe not necessarily going to go to war with Norway in EU4 very often as it stands right now, but maybe if they start competing in similar trade nodes, this is the kind of thing that could pull that closer together. On a more kind of close proximity basis, there's also going to be a new diplomatic action. There's going to be a few new diplomatic actions, it seems to read like, but this is the one that they told us about at least. The other ones were not shown. Well, this one wasn't even shown, but it was just, prognosticated, if you will. Is that as a country, you'll be able to like send an ultimatum to another country. So if you're playing as France, for example, in the normal start, maybe you send an ultimatum to Aragon. The way the ultimatum reads, it's like, give us X percentage of your trade power in this area, or maybe there will be war. So, you send them a request for some trade power. Aragon is the option to either say, I didn't say Aragorn earlier, did I? Oh, I'm never going to live that down. But anyway, Aragon will say yes, or they'll say no. And what do they get if they say no? Probably France will have a casus belli to go to war with them, so that's pretty dangerous. If they say yes, they lose trade power, but what they get in return is kind of like a pseudo-trade-based alliance with that country, in this case France, which means France can't attack them without giving up trade power. So you can see how France is like incentivized not to attack a country that's giving it trade power. But also, they maybe don't get as much of the benefit if they had just conquered that territory, but they get it for free. So, if you're getting trade power for free, that's cool. Maybe it incentivizes kind of hanging out with your allies a little bit more that are in close proximity rather than just steamrolling them. I don't know if that's how it will actually play out once the game gets into it. These are things like, we're going to change setting X, Y, and Z, and then I kind of feel like once I see it in action, I'll be like, oh, so this is what's going to happen more often, this is what's going to happen less often. It seems cool, though, to be able to kind of bully people into giving you trade power, and it'll have repercussions, both positive and negative, as a result of that. That's neat. You can, and this is where things get fuzzy for me from an explanation standpoint, you can designate a trade capital, and what that means is you will have a diplomatic capital, the way you have it right now, but you can also have a trade capital that will be in a coastal province, and the way that it was explained is basically like, again, I'm using France as an example because it's EU, right? But France is another good example for this because their capital is in Paris, or, it's downriver in the Seine, I think. I hope I'm pronouncing that even close to correct, but I've kind of given up that ghost when it comes to, European strategy games at this point. But anyway, yeah, so it's kind of downriver, but it might make more sense if you wanted to get like a lot of trading power. Why wouldn't you just have it on like the coast of the Atlantic? Maybe if you owned Brittany, you'd want to have it up in Brittany, or if you owned parts of Normandy, you'd want to have it up there so ships could get to you more easily before being siphoned off by other powers. So you can designate a trade capital. I assume that will allow you to capture more trade from that node, depending on where you move it, whatever node is closest to the one that you're moving it to. Anyway, that's kind of neat. There's also East India companies, and the way that this was kind of explained, and I hope I'm going to do an adequate job of explaining it back here, is that it's almost like a country or provinces that are distant, and they're not quite colonies, but you kind of rule them in a hands-off way, But they give you huge benefits to your trade. So imagine like Britain and India, for example. I don't know if you'll be able to pull as much manpower or as much production or, as much tax out of these countries, but from a trade standpoint, they'll allow you to have way more influence in much more distant trading nodes, is the way that it seems. But again, that is a pretty rudimentary explanation. What I should say, by the way, is there will be links in the video description below to some previews from other people who were at the event, especially for Hearts of Iron 4, to kind of cover the gaps in my knowledge, so you can maybe get a little bit more robust information about that. So that's how it seems right now. From Wealth of Nations. It's not coming out as soon, in all likelihood, as Rajas of India. It's set for spring 2014, kind of a nondescript date. No price to be announced still, and cool. You don't have to sell me too hard on EU4 or CK2 DLCs because I'm going to play them with Mathis and Arumba, and everyone adds at least a few things that I like. There's never been an expansion where I've been like, oh, I wish I didn't get this. Even Sons of Abraham, which was a little bit less essential than something like the Old Gods, there's still value in that for me. That'll vary from person to person. But anyway, I think it's cool. I want to keep playing these games for years, and I want to have the definitive editions of them. Basically, all you need to do is come out with them, and a lot of people I think who are diehard fans will buy them as long as there's a good effort made. Anyway, Hearts of Iron 4 is a little bit more of a tricky one for me to talk about, and I'm bringing up the fact sheet right now, not looking down at some kind of terrible spill on my desk. It is the Hearts of Iron series in general, if you're not familiar. It is a World War II strategy game, and it focuses on a much more narrow timeline than CK2 or EU4. In this case, it focuses on 1936, well, it's playable, I shouldn't say focuses. It's 1936 to 1948. So it's a 12-year period, but you have much more kind of like low-level control, and things move much more quickly, if that makes sense. It's coming out early 2015, as it said right now, but what we saw was very, very early. Again, 20-minute hands-off demo. And a lot of the stuff is just kind of like, it's just a shell right now, but it's got a long way to go. Price not announced. Who knows, if I had to, and it might be irresponsible to hypothesize, but it seems like, EU4 was $40. Wouldn't surprise me if Hearts of Iron 4 was around there as well. Let's talk about some of the main features of Hearts of Iron 4, because, again, what we saw was kind of very coarse and, broad level, wide-angled stuff. You can play as any country in the world, which is really cool, but obviously it focuses primarily on the great powers of World War II, like, the US, Britain, France, Spain, and actually can play a pretty major role. Germany, of course, Russia, China, Japan, and, Italy, African nations, well, the African front is more important. I shouldn't necessarily say African nation. But anyway, I hesitate to bring a lot of these countries up by name because, compared to a lot of Paradox games, World War II is not that long ago, and it still kind of exists in people's memories, so I'm not trying to leave anybody out or make you feel like your country's efforts were not welcome or, important in World War II. I'm just basically talking about the powers that people will primarily play in the game, I think. Anyway, again, deals with a very much smaller time frame, but it seems like it's almost a little bit more traditionally RTS-y, even though it is, pausable RTS like the other games. There's much more of like a quick evolution in tech and unit types and ideas than there is in other conflicts and in other PDS games in particular. So if you look at like CK2, you might have the same units for like 50 years or 100 years, and they'll still be as effective in, when is the 867 is the Old Gods start, if I remember correctly. Well, the same units are going to be, roughly as effective in 917 as they are in 867. Whereas in Hearts of Iron 4, it seems like the evolution between tech and units is much faster, and that kind of like interplay evolves much more quickly, and units that are good in 1936 might be absolutely steamrolled in 1938, for example. There's also a little bit more differentiation between the units in that you can, for tanks, for example, because this is the example we were shown, you can specialize them. So you can research, like, I want my tanks to be tank-destroying tanks, or I want my tanks to be mobile tanks. And, those tanks will work better against, I should say, some enemy units, and work worse against some other enemy units. So, units that allow you to steamroll Italy might run you into some problems against the Germans, for example. And there's big differences between the countries. Of course, it's asymmetrical. Not everybody starts at the same point. You probably could have gathered that for yourself. But there's also national ideas, and it doesn't necessarily work the same way as in EU4. It's more like, it's not like, oh, there's Russian ideas, there's German ideas, and the Germans get these and the Russians get these. It's more like, at least as we saw it, here are ideas that are kind of representative of what the countries did in the official timeline, or what actually happened in history, I don't know if you're like German, could you go to the Russian-inspired side, or if you're Russian and you go to the German-inspired side. But like, for example, the German tree includes things like making your army more mobile in the early years, especially, so that you can effectively execute blitzkriegs. And the Russian side is a little bit more like focusing on increasing your manpower so that you can send a lot of troops to the front. They're not necessarily the best trained troops, but you can send them there. And then like the American side was like you have less manpower, but the troops maybe have a little bit better equipment or are more properly trained. And again, I'm not trying to, you know, throw stones at anybody here by saying this. It's just how it is in the game right now, at least as it appears. What we basically saw was like zooming in and zooming out of the map. The map looks beautiful. You're going to see screenshots of it. It seems weird to dedicate so much attention to it right now, but it is the most obvious thing about the game that you just look at and you're like, oh, that map looks really good. You know, CK2 looks different than EU4, and a lot of people kind of had the problem with EU4. They thought it looked a little bit plasticine-y, and they preferred the CK2 map. I think it's going to be a little bit less divisive. I think Hearts of Iron 4, people are going to mostly uniformly like the way it looks. It seems to make sense the way it looks, and it pops. It looks really nice. Additionally, for someone like me, Hearts of Iron 3, which I have not played, but it has a reputation that kind of precedes it, of being very difficult to get into, very not obtuse necessarily, but, you know, the interface is complicated, and the game itself is more logistically complicated than other Paradox Grand Strategy games. What they've said about Hearts of Iron 4 is that they want to make it more accessible, but they don't want to dumb it down. And, I mean, obviously that's, like, marketing. I mean, and I'm not saying it's a lie, but obviously that's what you would say about a game like this, especially when Hearts of Iron 3, the biggest knock that most people have against it is that it's hard to get into. But they described it as kind of like a streamlining of the game without necessarily removing or dumbing down any of the components. It's just going to make it a little bit easier for new players to actually do the things that they want to do, as opposed to, you know, make it easier to do the things you want to do, if that makes sense. To accomplish the things you want to do. Make it easier to come up with a plan and execute that plan, not necessarily make it easier for that plan to succeed, is what I'm getting at. Because there is a period in those games where you're like, I know what I want to do, but I don't know how to do it. And that it's not necessarily saying that the game is easier just because it makes the learning curve a little bit more gentle. But anyway, again, it's far off, so who knows? Maybe it'll come out and it'll be like a match 3 or something like that. Probably pretty unlikely, though. The other thing that's really neat and is kind of in tune with that, that's why I was using it as like a preface, and I know I'm rambling here, I wanted to keep this to like 10 minutes, but overall, between all 3 games, but is that you can actually draw battle plans on the map, and that's not new. That's also in one of the Victoria 2 expansions, but not only can you draw battle plans on the map, but you can actually map your units to the arrows and the things that you draw on the map, and they'll be commanded. So you could set up something like a simultaneous invasion of a country, and then, you know, let the time tick up for like a year, and then press the, like, execute plan button, and then it'll just happen. And, you know, you can do that. The same thing, you can, like, drag a line across a front that you want to protect, and then your men will walk to it when you execute the plan, and then they'll spread out, and, you know, they'll spread out to cover the border, or the front. That's really all I'm going to talk about with Hearts of Iron 4. It's way too early to say anything more about it, really, except that it exists. It was the major announcement. I know people are going to be really excited. In the video description below, there's going to be a few links to previews for, well, I mean, probably all 3 games. But especially, I think I covered Rajas of India okay, but check out the ones for Wealth of Nations and Hearts of Iron 4 from people who play these games like crazy, like, you know, Rob Zacny from PCGamesN and Joe Francis from Strategy Informer and guys like that who play these games like crazy, and it's really their bread and butter. They'll have more robust coverage. So that's going to do it for this video covering the PDS stuff. I hope you enjoyed looking at my face, because there's not a whole lot of screenshots and trailers. Like, I'm not showing the Hearts of Iron 4 trailer right now, which is just like, you know, Winston Churchill speech that could get me content ID matched or something like that. Which is why I'm here in the bottom, this corner, probably. But there's going to be more coverage coming from PDXCon in the next couple of days. Warlock 2. You remember Warlock Master of the Arcane? There's going to be a sequel to that coming out in April that we get to spend like an hour of hands-on play with, maybe even an hour and a half of hands-on play with. There's going to be some stuff on War of the Vikings and Magical Wizard Wars coming from me, and oh my god, am I actually forgetting one? Rune Master, of course, the new Paradox development studio, not Grand Strategy, more like a hex-based Heroes of Might and Magic style game. Those previews are going to be coming over the course of the next couple of days. But I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to show your support by clicking the like button. And of course, subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this in the future. As always, thanks for watching. Hope you guys have enjoyed this and gleaned some useful information if you're a fan of these kind of games. And I will see you next time.